In the autumn of 1888, London was the richest, most powerful city on earth, the beating heart of an empire that stretched across a quarter of the globe. But just a few minutes' walk from the golden marble of the Bank of England lay the East End, a maze of damp alleys, overflowing tenement houses, and grinding poverty the rest of the city preferred not to think about. Between August and November of that year, a killer took control of these streets, striking in total darkness with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible for the time, then vanishing without a trace. For nearly 140 years, the world has asked the same question. Who was Jack the Ripper? A few years ago, headlines around the world proclaimed that modern science had finally done what generations of detectives could not. DNA evidence, they said, pointed directly at a 23-year-old Polish barber named Aaron Kosminski. It sounded like the ultimate triumph of forensic science over Victorian mystery. But here's what almost nobody reported afterward. That claim quietly fell apart, and the reason why is stranger than the original discovery itself. Stay until the end, because the actual scientific correction happened far more recently than you'd think, and it changes everything about how solved this case really is. At around 3:40 in the morning on Friday the 31st of August, 1888, a cart driver named Charles Cross was walking down Bucks Row in Whitechapel when he noticed what looked like a discarded tarpaulin near a gateway. It was the body of 43-year-old Ann Nichols, known as Polly, her throat cut so deeply it reached her spine. The police had seen plenty of violence in the East End. They had never seen anything like this. Nichols was only the beginning. Over the following 9 weeks, 4 more women were murdered in almost identical fashion, in what historians now call the Canonical Five. Annie Chapman was killed on the 8th of September behind 29 Hanbury Street. Elizabeth Stride was murdered in the early hours of the 30th of September in Dutfield's Yard. Just 4 to 5 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was murdered in Mitre Square, in what became known as the double event, a single night in which the killer struck twice across 2 separate police jurisdictions without any apparent fear of capture. And on the 9th of November, Mary Jane Kelly was murdered inside her own rented room at Miller's Court, giving the killer, for the first time, complete and uninterrupted privacy. The destruction was so extensive the attending police surgeon needed hours simply to document it. Victorian London had never experienced terror like this, and the Metropolitan Police, led by Commissioner Sir Charles Warren, were completely outmatched by a killer who left almost nothing behind. Part of the reason he was never caught sounds almost unbelievable today. Fingerprint analysis wouldn't be adopted by Scotland Yard until 1901, 13 years too late. Crime scenes weren't preserved. Officers often washed blood from the cobblestones immediately, simply to prevent public panic, destroying evidence without realizing it. There were no radios, no patrol cars, and DNA testing was still more than a century away from being invented. And yet the investigation was massive for its era, over 2,000 people interviewed, more than 300 suspects formally investigated. Hundreds of letters flooded in claiming to be from the killer, almost all obvious hoaxes, until one arrived at the Central News Agency on the 27th of September, written in red ink and signed with a name that would outlive everyone involved in the case, Jack the Ripper. Many historians now suspect it was actually written by a Central News Agency journalist named Tom Bulling looking to manufacture a sensational story. True or not, the name stuck permanently, and it's still the only thing most people today actually know about this case. After Mary Kelly's murder, the killing simply stopped. No arrest, no confession, no resolution. And that's exactly where this stops being a Victorian mystery and starts being a modern one, because the real police theories about who was responsible sat buried in confidential files for over a century, until private memos written by the detectives themselves began to surface. In 1894, Chief Constable Sir Melville McNarton named 3 leading suspects in an internal memo, one of them a Polish Jewish immigrant living in Whitechapel identified only as Kosminski. In 1910, Assistant Commissioner Sir Robert Anderson published memoirs claiming the killer had in fact been identified, a low-class Polish Jew committed to an asylum shortly after the murders stopped. And in the 1980s, historians discovered handwritten notes in the margin of Anderson's own book, written by Chief Inspector Donald Swanson, naming that same man directly, Aaron Kosminski, committed to Coney Hatch Asylum, where he died. Kosminski was real. Born in Poland in 1865, he emigrated to Whitechapel, worked briefly as a barber, and by 1890 his mental health had collapsed entirely, marked by hallucinations, paranoia, and severe self-neglect. He spent the rest of his life institutionalized. For decades he remained the police's favorite suspect, but there was no physical evidence connecting him to the murders. Then, in 2007, something extraordinary turned up at an auction house, and it would take 12 more years, and a level of genetic science Victorian detectives could never have imagined, before the world found out what it actually meant. According to family legend, a police sergeant had taken a blood-stained silk shawl from the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder as a gift for his wife. She never wore it, and it sat locked away for over a century until businessman Russell Edwards bought it and handed it to molecular biologist Dr. Yuri Luhalainen. Using infrared and UV imaging, Luhalainen identified staining consistent with blood and semen, and extracted fragments of mitochondrial DNA. Tested against living descendants, the blood matched Eddowes' family line, and the semen matched Kosminski's. In 2019, the findings were published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, and headlines around the world declared the case solved. It was Aaron Kosminski. Except it wasn't, and here's exactly why. When scientists looked closer, the claim fell apart on multiple fronts. The chain of custody is broken. Police kept an exhaustive inventory of every item found on Eddowes' body, down to a copper thimble and a bar of soap, and the shawl is never mentioned. The sergeant who supposedly took it belonged to an entirely different police force than the one with jurisdiction over that crime scene. The shawl itself was also handled by dozens of people, unsealed, for over 130 years, making any DNA sample recovered from it deeply unreliable by modern forensic standards. And most damning of all, mitochondrial DNA isn't unique to one person. It's shared across entire maternal bloodlines, meaning the specific marker found on the shawl was carried by roughly 9 out of every 10 people of European descent at the time. It can rule a suspect out. It can never prove one guilty on its own. On top of that, the shawl is an expensive silk piece with fine embroidery. While Eddowes was living in such extreme poverty, she would almost certainly have pawned an item like that rather than kept it. Now here's the part almost no headline ever followed up on. In August of 2024, after critics asked to independently verify the underlying data, Luhalainen was unable to produce the original raw mitochondrial DNA results, citing an instrument failure. The Journal of Forensic Sciences responded by publishing a formal expression of concern attached to the 2019 paper, telling readers its conclusions could no longer be treated as reliably supported. Read that again. The single most scientific-sounding piece of evidence in this entire case is now, by the journal's own admission, in doubt. And in early 2025, descendants of both Eddowes and Kosminski publicly called for a formal legal inquest, hoping a court might finally weigh the evidence properly. That's a request for legal review, not new science, and it hasn't changed the underlying picture. Kosminski remains a genuinely compelling suspect. He has never been proven guilty. Other names still surface every year. James Maybrick, tied to a diary most historians consider a modern forgery. Chaim Hyams, a violent local butcher. Charles Lechmere, the very man who found Polly Nichols' body. Each dominates headlines briefly before the case settles back into the same unresolved place it's occupied since November 1888. The uncomfortable truth is that Jack the Ripper benefited from a perfect historical storm. No modern forensic capability, an overwhelmed police force, and a dark, overcrowded district that had spent decades hiding society's worst predators in plain sight. Unless an uncontaminated piece of physical evidence with usable nuclear DNA is somehow discovered and definitively linked to the case, he will remain exactly what he became in 1888, a shadow that disappeared into the fog and was never truly caught. He was a coward who preyed on some of the most vulnerable women in Victorian society, women already failed by the city they lived in long before he ever found them. And while his invented name became a permanent fixture of global popular culture, the real tragedy of this story has never been the mystery of his identity. It has always been the 5 lives he ended far too soon: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Britain's most infamous unsolved case, subscribe for more investigations just like it. and let us know in the comments whether you believe Kosminski was really Jack the Ripper, or whether the real killer is someone history has simply forgotten.